Good day, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of a new playlist, which is going to be about investing in real estate in Malaysia, specifically in Johor. We're going to cover some high-level facts and information without too much detail, so that you can get comfortable about making a decision about buying property in Johor. So first things first, let's clear the big elephant in the room, which is buying real estate in Malaysia a wise option? Now, I know that Malaysia hasn't had the best reputation in Singapore in the past few years. Lots of people consider buying a property in Malaysia a bad idea, that you will lose money. And that's especially true for most of the people who bought in the last bull run, which was probably 2012, 2013 at the peak. And until today, probably most of these buyers have not recovered or made any capital appreciation from their investments. So as a result, I think Malaysia has a bad reputation as a property investment destination. Of course, today I'm here to try and correct some of that misperceptions and some opportunities that have been derived. But I think the general reason for poor performance in Malaysian real estate is the Malaysian politics. As you know, the Malaysian government changed in 2018, and we have had, I think, four prime ministers since, and a lot of that has contributed to the political instability, bad decision making, some flip-flop changes here and there. I mean, Malaysians themselves are extremely frustrated by this. I think we now hope that in 2023, with the new government under Anwar Ibrahim, that things will get better, more stable, right? And we don't blame foreigners for what has happened recently. And of course, that's no excuse, right, for bad performance anyhow. But it is what it is, right? So that's why political stability is important in any country, right? But so with that out of the way, let's start with 3 reasons why in 2023 I think that most people in Singapore should consider again seriously about buying a property in Johor. The reason number 1 is the RTS. Now, I've covered the RTS in many videos. You can see it on my YouTube, on my TikTok series, what the RTS is. But basically, the RTS is an MRT linking Woodlands to Johor Bahru City Centre that is completing in 2026. Some people tell me, Ryan, I want to wait until the RTS is completed. Well, yeah, I mean, it's being constructed right now. It's another 3 years-ish from this year, 2023. Already construction has started, right? If you want to see more photos about that, do check out my other videos. But with the RTS completion in 2026, what you will see is a much reduced travel time between Johor and Singapore, and also potentially, most likely, a large increase in amount of people that can travel to Johor and between Johor and Singapore regularly, right? That can only be a good thing, right, for property prices in Johor. Definitely, right, like in Singapore, anywhere when a new MRT station completes, right, you will see property prices go up. So similarly, if you see an MRT station complete in Johor that links to Singapore, yeah, to the rest of Singapore, it is only natural that Johor property prices will go up as well. It is the first MRT to be built, right, between Johor and Singapore in I guess over 100 years, right? Longer. It's been a very long time. So I think if you look at that as a catalyst for why Johor property prices will go up, it's a good time to buy now before that actually happens. Reason number 2, Singapore is basically an expensive place, right? I mean, if you look at Singapore property prices, private property prices, right, they are similarly compared to places like New York, LA, Tokyo, Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong is more expensive still, but I mean Singapore basically is expensive, right? And not only in property prices, but also in the cost of living, right? Inflation, I think, hit Singapore pretty hard. Recently, we have an increase in GST, so cost of living from food to transportation, right? All these have gone up, right? Especially in the past 1-2 years, with interest rates at a high. This also affects things not only for day-to-day living, but also for people who are considering retirement, right? So retirement is also possibly quite expensive in Singapore, healthcare costs as well. So one reason why Johor has become a preferred destination in recent years is because lots of people are trying to bring down the cost of living, right? Not only property rentals, but I mean the day-to-day food, transportation, all these are much cheaper in Johor, much cheaper in Malaysia, right? And we are not only talking again, not only about retirees, but also think about the over 1 million Malaysians who are working in Singapore, right? Singapore has a population about 5.5 million, roughly 1 million plus are Malaysians, so almost more than 20% of the people in Singapore are actually are Malaysians. These people are also heavily impacted, and very likely don't mind or would prefer to spend or buy or rent properties in Malaysia to avoid the high cost of living in Singapore. So they earn the Sing dollar and try to have their costs in ringgit, right? So that's also another reason why buying in Johor is very possible because of this large market alone. Even if you take out the Singaporeans and just look at the Malaysians working in Singapore, there's a big market for the Johor market today. Third reason that I would say why property investment in Johor is reasonable now is basically because Singapore property laws are quite regulated, right? HDB, of course, is great, but it's public housing. There's a lot of rules, right? And even if you buy private property in Singapore, the most logical scenario for most people is you have husband own one, wife own one. I think that's it, right? I mean, for you to pay the ABSD to own multiple properties in Singapore, I think it's very difficult, right? I mean, if you are high income with cash, you may likely maybe own two each, right? And that's a major achievement as it is moving forward, right? I know people in Singapore who have this already but they bought property much earlier, right? Like 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's why they can own multiple properties in Singapore. But if you want to do this, right, in the long run, I think Singapore is only going to become more difficult, not easier. So I would consider buying in Johor as a way to diversify out, another way to buy property, get on that property investment game, right? But don't put all your eggs into in one basket in Singapore. Anyhow, in Singapore, it's difficult. You may be sitting a lot of cash in Singapore, but you don't have a good place to invest it. You can play the stock market, you can buy a car. You know, some properties in Johor today is the same price as a COE in Singapore, right? So it's only logical that because of such tight rules, property rules in Singapore, that people have to consider buying elsewhere, and Johor is a very natural option. Okay, so let's start with as a Singaporean, what can you buy in Malaysia, right? The great thing about Singaporeans in Malaysia is that you can buy freehold, right? Freehold property is easily accessible. Lots of property in Malaysia, Johor are freehold. There are a lot of freehold options, so you can buy freehold. There's no restriction to that. Number two is you can buy landed property, right? The government in Malaysia does not restrict you. You can buy landed. Unlike Singapore, right? Singapore, only Singapore citizens can buy landed. But in Malaysia, Singaporeans can still buy landed property. So there's an interesting option for you, right? As a Singaporean, you can also buy commercial property, industrial property. This includes shop house, shop office, retail lots, right? But if you're buying shop house or shop office, foreigners, let's say like Singaporeans, are only allowed to buy 3-story shop house or taller. You cannot buy the single story or 2-story ones. You have to buy 3-story or higher, right? These are what some options given to Singaporeans. You can buy land, you can buy residential land, you can buy commercial land. You are only not allowed to buy agricultural land, but I think that's quite rare. So in this sense, Singaporeans have quite a wide choice in terms of properties they can buy in Malaysia. You can buy land to build your own house, for example. The second important thing that I think Singaporeans need to know is that to buy a property in Johor, the minimum purchase price has to be 1 million ringgit and above. So that is roughly 300,000 Singapore dollars, right? So you can, for resale transactions, so if you want to buy from another owner, the minimum price that you must achieve is 1 million ringgit. There are some exemptions. For example, in the Medini zone, right? Medini is where Legoland is where Gleneagles Hospital is. So in the Medini zone, Singaporeans can buy below 1 million ringgit. So like if you can find a 300,000 ringgit condo, which there is, you can buy a 300 ringgit thousand or $100,000 Sing condo in Medini, right? You can buy. So the 1 million restriction does not apply in Medini. But however, Medini is a 99-year leasehold location. There's a trade-off over there. Some other exemptions to this also are certain projects, right, being sold by developers. They are still tied to the old rules where foreigners can buy below 1 million. But such projects are rare. There are not many left in Johor today where foreigners can buy below 1 million for such projects. So just take note, anything resale transaction is 1 million ringgit and above. So that's about 300,000 Sing. The third thing you must consider is, do foreigners pay any extra fees? Yes. So as a Singaporean, you do have to pay what we call the foreigner state levy, right? This state levy for foreigners is a 2% of the purchase price or 20,000 ringgit, whichever is higher, right? So it's a minimum of 20,000 ringgit. So this is in a way, it's like the Malaysian ABSD version. Of course, ABSD in Singapore is much, much higher, right? So the only difference between yourself as a Singaporean buying against a Malaysian is this 2% state levy. So consider that the ABSD for foreigners is only 2%, It's not very large amount, so it's quite acceptable in most cases. Most people are okay to pay the 2%, right? Otherwise, all the fees that you buy to a property compared to a Malaysian is the same. Are there any fees and costs for doing a property purchase in Malaysia? Yes, there are stamp duties, the normal buyer stamp duties, and some legal fees. All in, to summarize it, you should assume that the buyer stamp duties and legal fees are roughly 3 to 4% of your purchase price. So if you have the buyer stamp duty, legal fees, plus your 2% foreigner levy, you should assume that your total transaction cost anywhere between 5 plus to 6% maximum, right, of any property transaction in Johor. 5 to 6%. Can Singaporeans get bank financing in Malaysia? The answer is yes. In fact, if a Singaporean were to borrow from a Malaysian bank, right, that means you take a ringgit loan. That is often preferred because you then hedge against the currency problem. Lots of people tell me, yeah, ringgit keep dropping. Yeah, but if you take a ringgit loan, then it doesn't really make a problem, right? Because if you buy a property, you get an 80% ringgit loan, right? Then your currency risk is actually almost zero. So you take a Malaysian bank loan, right? Malaysian banks are quite happy to lend to Singaporeans because they will take your salary in Singapore. So if you earn $5,000 Sing, for example, they will times 3, so it becomes 15,000 ringgit. So your ability to get a loan in Malaysia is quite high. Malaysian banks do like to lend to Singaporeans, so your chance of getting a loan is quite good. And when you take a loan in Malaysia, like I said, you will not affect your borrowings in Singapore, right? So they would the TDSR in Singapore is not affected. So it's always wise to take bank financing in Malaysia rather than take bank financing in Singapore. Interest rates in Malaysia today for residential property is roughly 4% plus, right, which is not too far off from Singapore. How does the typical booking process for property is like? You pay a booking fee. There is no standard in Malaysia, so if you're buying from a developer, the developer will set a fee. If you're buying from resale, it's typically 2 to 3% booking fee. There'll be an option to purchase similar to Singapore, and once the options are exercised, there will be a financing process in the bank, and then you sign a sales and purchase agreement. For resale transactions, you can typically get the property keys 3 to 4 months from the date you sign the sales and purchase agreement. So it's very similar to Singapore resale transaction. Ryan, so what will you recommend a Singaporean to buy? Well, it very much depends on your objective, right? If you are buying a Johor property for a retirement home or a weekend home, a second home, then basically I would say you buy whatever that you like, right? I mean, it's not up to me to tell you where you like to stay or what property that you enjoy, right? If you go and spend some time in Johor, if there's certain locations that you like, you can consider to rent in that area first, and then get a feel of the area. Then before you decide to plunge into the buying process, right? I will always recommend that. If you want to buy a second home or longer term home in Malaysia, you can rent first, like the area, then you should buy, right? Get more familiar with Johor. So what are some of the more popular areas? I mean, Bukit Indah, Puteri Harbour. These are popular areas where lots of Singaporeans stay. Austin, Taman Sutra, JB Town, including the Brow Zone. I mean, there's lots of Singaporeans who like to enjoy this area for the commercial vibrancy. If you like something more quiet, you can always go to the Iskandar Puteri, Puteri Harbour, Bukit Indah areas. If you are buying for investment, I would suggest a condo, right? Purely for investment rental yield, right? Today, apartments and condos in Johor, you can get a gross 4 to 5% rental yield, right? And condo, the good thing of course is easy maintenance, right? You don't have to pay other than maintenance fees and property tax, right? There's very little else you need to do to manage a condo, right? And agents can get you tenants quite decently in today's market for rentals. If you're buying for capital appreciation, I would suggest a landed property. Landed property in Malaysia still holds value better, primarily because Malaysia still has quite a fair bit of land. So locals, the Malaysians who live in Johor, or even the Malaysians who work in Singapore, they still prefer to buy landed where possible. I think Johor is not yet at the stage where people don't have a choice and they have to buy condo. So locals still try to buy landed where they can. It's also one reason why Singaporean investments in Johor have not done well. It's because lots of Singaporeans used to buy condo in JB those days, where today Malaysians with that kind of budget still will buy landed. So which is the reason why in secondary market a lot of landed still perform well and retain value better than condos. So I would suggest that if you want to have something for capital appreciation, buy landed while you still can, because there may come a point in the future where Singaporeans may not be able to buy landed anymore in Malaysia. The other thing to take note about landed is also the fact about maintenance. Landed property require more maintenance, right? If you have grass, You know, there's outdoor paint to worry about. The management body don't really take. There's no management body typically for landed projects. You more or less have to take care of the maintenance of the property by yourself, which is quite different from condos and what most Singaporeans are used to in Singapore. And of course, if you have a higher budget, you should consider other things like buildings, shop offices, retail lots, you know, and factories. You know, all these are also options available to you if you have a bigger budget or a larger risk tolerance. Okay, so once I have bought the property, what kind of ownership costs that do I have to have, right? The things I have to pay regularly. So number one, of course, is property tax. Property tax in Johor is 0.2% of your property value, right? It's paid annually, 0.2% annually. So it's the bill comes twice a year, right? You can pay online. A lot of this stuff today in Malaysia, it's like Singapore, you can pay online. You have probably have to learn how, right? Where to pay. But if you have online banking in Malaysia, very highly recommended to get online banking in Malaysia. You can normally pay all these online. Other things, of course, are the quick rent, fire insurance, right? You live in a condo, the building management will help bill this to you. So you just pay, follow the building from the joint management body, right? Another thing that may have, quick rent is basically land tax, right? If you ask me what is quick rent, land tax. So there's a property tax and there's a land tax, right? A bit different from Singapore. But normally, quick rent is very small amount if you live in a condo. If you stay in a landed, it's a bit more because you have a landed. Okay. And fire insurance, of course, is the insurance against fire, right? And of course, if you live in a condo or any strata gated environment, typically you have to pay the maintenance fees for managing the strata area, right? Similar to any condo in Singapore or you know in HDB, we call it conservancy fees. How about income tax? If you earn rental income in Malaysia, right, generally speaking, you do not have to declare that income in Malaysia because you are not a Malaysia resident. If you are only considered a Malaysia resident, if you live in Malaysia more than 6 months in a year, then you become a Malaysia resident, and then you have to declare your income in Malaysia. If you live in Singapore, then you are still a Singapore tax resident. In theory, you should take the Malaysia rental and declare in your Singapore income tax as well. But in practice, I think a lot of people still don't really declare it either way, right? I think and so far as we can tell, tax authorities don't really chase this money right now. But in theory, that's the correct way to do it. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. We tried to cover a high level how to buy property in Johor. Some important points to take note. I mean, if you scroll back in this video, you should be able to answer most of the common questions. You should get answers for most of the common questions that typically people have when about buying in Johor. So if you have any questions or other topics that you'd like me to elaborate further, do drop me a comment on the YouTube comments below. And if you do like our content, please like, share, subscribe. Do check out our other videos on our YouTube channel. We have a TikTok as well. We have a Facebook group as well for all the other news sharing and discussions about investments in Singapore and Malaysia. So thank you very much. Hope to see you guys soon again. Bye-bye.